Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the host of this show and a potential Green Party candidate for governor of Maryland in 2026. I'm using this show to highlight interesting people and ideas that help me and you to understand what is happening and what is possible. You can learn more about the campaign by going to gogreen2026.com. Guests on this show do not necessarily support my campaign or the Green Party. They've agreed to come on to discuss ideas and issues. And of course, click the subscribe button on YouTube so you can keep up to date with this podcast. Hello, it is October 15th, and we're continuing our election season special of the Go Green podcast. And tonight we are talking with Toya López, a candidate for Minnesota House of Representatives District 61A. Toya is a health professional, community leader, queer Latine, and Green Party Socialist, and at her core, Toya is and will always be a community organizer rising to the occasion for neighbors, our health, and our planet. Toya's website describes that justice goes beyond electoral politics, past mobilizing around these issues, and is part of a broader effort to support our growing movement toward revolutionary systemic change. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while, and I'm excited to get to it. And with that, I want to welcome Toya López to the show. Toya, how are you doing?
Howdy, I'm doing pretty all right. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you. I know you did a podcast with a bunch of other Green Party candidates last night. I know you're out there actively campaigning, so I appreciate you taking a couple minutes, maybe an hour, to talk about some stuff.
No, yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely pretty good to be able to not only spread the word about what I'm doing here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but also to share in that together and to share these ideas across the nation and maybe across the globe. So
yeah, totally. And that, that's really what we're trying to do, and make sure that people know that not just this election season, but every election season, there's Greens running for offices up and down the ballot and across the country. So with that, let's get into it. Toya, how did you get involved in politics?
yeah, so I would say that similarly to I'm forgetting exactly who I'm quoting, forgive me, but that the personal is political, and I feel that pretty pretty intensely in my own body and in my own life. Uh, so aside from my own identities of, being like Latina and disabled and queer, and how merely existing is a political statement, also in my career and what I still consider myself at my core being a health professional, that things that I would think, maybe this is my neurodivergence coming out, but that I would think make sense, such as, treating people, um, looking at most things as a public health, from a public health lens, trying to be equitable and also save money and also like distribute resources equitably. All of that makes so much sense to me, and yet the hurdles to actually enacting and implementing a lot of these, I guess, basic sense um, solutions just seem to be bogged down by the political machine. And so I feel like I've come here by accident, or perhaps it was by fate, and I have, I guess, risen to the occasion, not because I think I'm particularly more suited than many of my other very intelligent, very like my neighbors who work very hard, my neighbors who've been doing a lot already in their own communities, but because I find myself in a particular place where I can take that step and maybe jam my foot in the door for all of the other people to come in and also be able to have their voices heard in the political space. And so that's kind of what got me here. If you want to look for more tangibles, when I first moved to Minnesota, which is about 7 years ago now, I joined a group of health professionals who were very, very motivated to do something about climate, uh, and also things about Pipeline 3, which was a big thing at the time. And so I easily just became part of that group, started doing a lot of advocacy work around Line 3, and then later on shutting down polluters in my area, such as the Smith Foundry. Um, and through all of that, I started to become more and more, I guess, not so much invested, but like seeing behind the curtain of a lot of governmental, state, other agencies, especially in the ways that they have failed their community to address the health concerns that people are testifying to with their words and with their bodies. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I love the lens, the health lens, as a way of seeing the world and addressing politics. I think it's a really useful way to address it, and I appreciate that focus. How did that lead you to choose to run for state representative?
Yeah, so I would say that is more so serendipity. What happened is that I had been tossing around the idea of becoming more involved in politics for a little while. I was actually hoping to get back into the technical aspects of implementing climate solutions. And then, uh, well, obviously, COVID happened in 2020, and climate things was just not top of the priorities in the health space, as you can imagine. And I started getting a lot more involved in policy. And as I was joining boards, finding myself in all these other spaces, people actually started reaching out to me to see if I wanted to run for office, mostly as a DFLer or as a Democrat. We're the DFL here in Minnesota. Or I guess not we, but you know what I mean. And I decided to first see how my friends foray into running for a city council position went. And from there, I was like, you know what? I think I'll give it a go. And what happened was I was on the Amtrak, and it was February, and I got a message from one of my friends. Did you know that the incumbent is retiring? And the incumbent, Representative Frank Hornstein, I guess, like, as a fellow Green, um, well, you and I, looking at Frank's like history, especially as a public health, public transportation champion, and also all of his work in closing incinerators. That's pretty good for a Democrat, you know. And so, like, I didn't have any reason really to run against him. Plus, being an incumbent for the past 22 years didn't really make that much sense. And so when I heard the news that he was retiring, I sent a little message on Facebook to one of my friends who's more involved in the political space, and I was like, "Do you think? Do you think it'd be a good idea?" And that's how that really took off there.
Yeah, no, I love that story, and I think the opportunity to take an open seat on, I think, is a really good one. I like taking on a 22-year-old incumbent is a hard challenge, especially if you don't disagree with them that much, you know.
Yeah.
But the
Or like, out of
opportunity,
all the people doing a good job, why shake the boat too much there particularly? But
yeah, and so tell me a little bit about your district. What is the district like? What is 61A like?
yeah, so my district is all in Minneapolis, and this is, the same Minneapolis, which is apparently a crater, according to Trump. Um, it is not, and I was also there during the uprising. The actual perimeters or geographic of my space is, uh, how would I say? There's that you run the whole gamut. You have a lot of what people would call McMansions on one side, in like maybe the Kenwood area and Bryn Mawr, and then you have just like deep poverty and a lot of like um, new immigrants, especially, well, of course, like older immigrants from Somalia, and then newer immigrants from Afghanistan and also from Ecuador coming in. And a lot of those folks are in Elliott Park, which is where I live. And then we have other spaces where there's just a lot of homelessness too. And So we run the whole gamut. We have plenty of like middle class folks in there. We have a lot of queer folks too, which is also really cool to see. But it's very diverse, and uh, and yeah, I would say I could go much more into that. But what I would say is that particularly for my own neighborhood, I don't know how things are done in other states, but a lot of times, with redistricting and stuff, which has happened here earlier, there's sometimes that neighborhood or that part or that town that kind of gets tossed around between different places, and so that's my neighborhood.
Totally understand that. Yeah, a lot of similarity there. I mean, I ran for state delegate in Baltimore City in 2018, and we know Trump has a ton to say about Baltimore too.
Hmm.
And it was, shortly after the uprising around Freddie Gray, and our district I think spans from suburban to sort of suburban in the city to very urban. It has some of Johns Hopkins in it. It has some immigrant population. So it sounds very similar. And to your point about redistricting, our side of the street is one city council district. Our
Hmm.
neighbor on the other side of the street is a different city council district. So,
Hmm.
I get, we are literally like the line runs down the middle of our street. And, I think Baltimore and Minneapolis have a decent amount in common, and it sounds like our districts do as well. And I guess one other question I would ask in that regard is like, what is the state of democracy and civic engagement in Minnesota and in Minneapolis?
Yeah, so I feel like I could give you two answers that seem to be very opposed to each other, but they are also the lived reality, right, of democracy in Minneapolis. And I also want to preface this with, Minneapolis being not only, nationally and globally exposed for our racial inequities, but that it's been this way at least since I moved here, where we do have, I guess, good healthcare compared to the US standards, and we do have good housing or affordable housing, again, compared to US standards, and yet the ability or access to that differs wildly between just people in the same district as mine. So, on one hand, I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of folks who, and this is also something that apparently Prince said about Minneapolis, that this is where revolution is going to start. And honestly, I do believe him. We have a lot of people who have been disenfranchised probably for generations. A lot of folks who haven't even voted for a long time are coming together in mutual aid circles. We're figuring out how to do things on our own, knowing that we can't really put our trust in the government, that yes, we may have like some access to healthcare, but the illusion of services is real. And in that sense, I'm seeing people come together in types of like cooperatives, or I'm seeing people come together with like um, a library patrons union, or creating a autonomous yurt union, which essentially builds like yurts for homeless people in my area, and my unsheltered neighbors. And in all those ways, that is where I'm starting to see hope in democracy, actually, and also in the wins that we've been able to do. Especially, I'm thinking right now of the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute and the creation of the urban farm, and trying to make that a cooperative and also with community input, so that when we get wins, all of these climate wins, all of these community wins aren't then turned into gentrification and then now being held hostage by someone else. And also, we do have actually a lot of unions here already who have been doing a lot of work, right, for decades, and I'm seeing a lot of hunger, right, for social power and political power. So that conversation is starting. Like, it's now beyond just material gain. And now more so the picket line is not only against your boss, but against genocide or against environmental degradation. So what is the state of democracy? Honestly, not very good. Despite all of these talks, we're still, I feel, fledgling in our movement. I understand that these things have to be slow to build momentum. And even in myself, I feel the lack of practice, right? Of how does it look like, right, to do participatory budgeting? What even would direct democracy feel like, right? No one's ever asked me these questions before, and now we're trying to implement it, and it's all brand new. So the state right now isn't great. People are not used to, right, really participating, right, in civic engagement past voting, right? Like, we know what voting is, and that's about it. But I have a lot of hope because people are starting to practice these skills, this growing edge, and that is very exciting.
Yeah, it does sound really exciting, and again, sounds very similar to what's happening in Baltimore. We've had nobody but a Democrat elected in our city council since 1960 or something like that, and there's a lot of sort of unhealthiness as it relates to electoral politics and things like that. But on the ground and in communities, there's a lot of networks that have long been active, a lot of new networks getting active, cooperatives are forming, mutual aid is forming, unions are becoming politicized. And I really appreciate that piece about like not knowing how to do this. Because I think that there's a lot of folks that know how to do what they are trying to do, but don't know how to do it in collaboration as a power from below movement. And we got to figure it out by doing it. We can't, there's no way other than, we can study, we can learn, we can talk to each other. But some of this stuff it feels new because it is new. And we just got to get out there and do it. And I appreciate that. And it feels, again, very similar to Baltimore in some ways. And maybe even after this podcast, after this campaign, I'd love to connect with you more about what's going on there because it does feel very related. And with that, let me ask this question. How did you end up with the Green Party?
Yeah, so I would say that, well, for one, I'm just going to shift here a little bit. Being primarily introduced to like the political space from like the aspect of climate change, the Green Party makes the most sense. And even when I was, before I was really very politically conscious, back when they were doing a, what would I say, like baby, like baby's first, election ballot, they were having us try it out in middle school or whatnot. And I voted green then, and so maybe it was prophecy. But yeah, I would say that in terms of practicality, Minneapolis and Minnesota in general has had, leadership and wins, especially in the green space. So even though there has been atrophy over the past few years for the Green Party here, a lot of, the old hats are still here. People still have all of these positive memories. And that structure, the ghost of that structure is still there. And then, as you probably already noted, I do also have an endorsement by the Socialist Party USA, and I did pursue an endorsement from the Democratic Socialists, which that was a 53% vote, so I didn't quite get there, but I'm still pretty good friends with a lot of people in my local chapter. And that the strategy right now is a broad left progressive coalition, especially as third parties, for us to break into that space and I guess settle our differences another time. And so also, I just really didn't want to run as DFL. I think I forgot to mention that piece. I did think about it for a little bit, just because I'm like, man, like, is this even going to be possible, right? Because there are people in Minnesota who are dual endorsed by a different party and are also running Democrat. But for me, well, first, I didn't really want to be endorsed by a party that has alienated so many of my neighbors and is, currently committing and funding atrocities. And also, I feel like I have been able to see past the veil a little bit of the overwhelming power of uh, Team Blue, as we would say. So in my district, there is no Republican running, by the way. So that's another context. And, despite all of this funding, all of this power that the DFL has, they're still unable to really turn out my neighbors to be engaged in like the caucus process and in the planning process. And so for me, being able to like just see that and witness that and be like, oh, okay, this isn't an undefeatable machine. And so I don't feel like I need to compromise, especially on something that is so important to so many people, wanting someone who's bold enough to forego and shut that entirely. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that as a strategy and as a reason. And it's like if you can choose a value aligned party and still be able to speak to your neighbors and still be able to talk about problems, solutions, and values, then absolutely it makes sense to
yeah,
do. And so how's it going? How's your campaign going?
I would say that my campaign is going pretty well. I will admit that I kept my expectations very low when I was first getting into this. Not only do I not have a long political career, or I've mostly been involved in the scrappy grassroots spaces that tend to be disliked, and then also facing the machine of our current political system. But I wasn't even sure if I would get on the ballot, which I was able to do with 500 signatures, and I had been told by many people, I don't know how far you're going to make it. I don't even know if you will make it, right? And so now being here and mostly like in door knocking with my neighbors, hearing there is one neighbor who told me that he hadn't voted in 8 years because the DFL has abandoned like him as a Middle Eastern person, uh, but that he'll come out and vote for me. And I was like, oh, this is why I'm doing this, right? This is working. Because as much as the goal is to win, and I feel like there is a possibility for that, especially considering I can't be accused of spoiling the ballot, because there's no one else. It's just me and the Democratic candidate, or the Democrat candidate. But also that the larger goal, right, is that inspiration piece to be like, no, we can do it actually, right? We have support. We have all of these people who've been wanting and asking for more. We have, like, I think like 20% of the people who voted in like the presidential primary did uncommitted in Minneapolis. So I'm like, we're here, you know? And uh and yeah, I just kind of want to get that ball rolling, and I feel like this is going to be the beginning of something really great for progressive people in Minnesota. So
Yeah, I love that. And that's really my approach to campaigns as well. Is like, look, I'm going to go all out and I'm going to try to win. But I understand that changing this two-party system, even if it's at the local level, is a really daunting challenge. One of the hardest ones in organizing in the US. And there is very good work to do along the way. And as we do that work, we'll get closer and closer to winning. And we'll get closer and
mm-hmm,
closer, not just to winning elections, but winning justice, winning
mm-hmm,
freedom, winning liberation, and I love that approach that you have to it. And following on your socials, it looks like you're very active. It looks like you're out there, you're talking to people, you're doing the work. And who knows what the next 20 days will bring, but it seems like you're doing the kind of work to build power within community for those folks who feel left behind, and maybe those folks who just are looking for something different.
yeah.
And on that, I noticed one of the things that you have on your website that you have a lot of emphasis on is these community endorsements. And I love this idea of getting endorsements from people in your community. It's great to get endorsements from organizations, especially ones that are value aligned, but chasing down the organizations that are part of the sort of Democrat advocacy complex, I think is not as worthwhile as getting your neighbors who have worked with you in the past to say, hey, Toya is great. Here's why I think so. Talk a little bit about why that is important to you, why that's an emphasis on your website and why it's part of your political strategy.
Yeah. I guess if I can talk from the strategy portion first here, well, one, like you mentioned, it is it is very difficult to break into the like the Democrat or DFL like stronghold or maybe like hostage situation that is happening with a lot of the nonprofits or folks who are doing community or organizational endorsements or even unions as well. That hasn't stopped me from filling out all of those questionnaires and stuff. It's actually really helpful for knowing what types of questions or things that people care about. And it's a lot of organizations, right, that have reached out to me and still not endorsed me, right? One of them really cared about Palestinian solidarity, which of course my opponent wasn't going to come out for. And as far as I know, I think I would be the only one who did, but still wouldn't endorse my campaign. And even in talking privately with a couple different people, whether they're lobbyists or whether they work at a certain organization, they're like, hey, I support you, but right, like we don't want to create a bad impression on the DFL or the next, right, the potential next representative, right? And so to me, that feels bad, right? Especially if, as an organization, you're trying to be leading, you're trying to change leadership or change how things work, and still being too afraid to step up for what your community is saying that they want. So, and then I guess, regardless of whether or not I would have gotten these endorsements, right? I still think that getting community endorsements is really important because, well, one, we know that a lot of these traditional or conventional, right, leadership roles oftentimes are products or follow in the legacy of systemic racism. They follow in the legacy of classism. And we have a lot of leaders in the community, right? But they don't have, those really glorious jobs, or maybe they do. And I just, reach out to them personally and be like, hey, would you mind supporting my campaign? I see the work that you're doing. And in that, that's also a good way to build a network together with some people who may have even already, like sworn off politics. They're like, all politicians are, dirty and corrupt. And honestly, most of the time I don't disagree. And being like, hey, if we can vouch for each other as a community, we can help dismantle, right, the nonprofit industrial complex, the, machine around politics that has everything in a chokehold. And we can tap into that authenticity that everyone's looking for.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I think that that's exactly to me, that's exactly the right approach. Fill out those surveys, see what you can do. It's good to get to answer those policy questions. It's good prep for what it's going to be like if and when you win, because they're the kind of policy questions that those organizations are going to come to you with. And don't compromise in order to get them. Be your true self, be critical if you need to, and then turn to the community, because there's those unsung heroes out there that are doing work in the community every day. The people in the community know more than they know some of these advocacy groups, and if you see your neighbor, if somebody comes on your page and sees their neighbor there, that's probably more important to most people in your neighborhood than some group that spends its time lobbying all year, and
Mhm.
so yeah, no, I love that approach to it. And I was reading through them, and your neighbors love you. Your neighbors believe that you're not that corrupt politician. They believe that you're the one who's different, and I think seeing that is real and authentic. People look at it and they understand that that person is not doing it for power or access. They're doing it out of belief and out of trust. And I definitely encourage folks who are watching to go to Toya's page. It's on the website. It's on the bottom of the banner right now. And check out those community endorsements. There's a lot of great stuff there, but those community endorsements really speak to the leader that you are and that your neighbors believe you to be. So folks should go check those out. I want to ask one more question before we get to some of your policy stuff.
All right.
Oftentimes in election seasons, people look at the Green Party presidential race and they say, the Green Party doesn't help its down ballot candidates. It doesn't do anything to draw attention to, state delegate races or city council races or anything like that. Has the Green Party, either at the state, local, or national level, been helpful to you in your campaign?
I mean, I feel like you mentioned earlier, right? I was just on a what was that? A live stream with folks, and so that's been immensely helpful. Also, a lot of the wisdom that I got from the local Green Party chapter has been really helpful, as well as the let me think here. I don't think it's priorities, right? But the kind of list of what we're looking to change, right? All of that is very inspirational for what could be, right? And also, especially with the vice president candidate like Dr. Ware, also being from South Minneapolis, it's really great to see this kind of connection between all of us, really. And then also for, I guess, what I would call the less sexy bits, there is, of course, different concerns about ballot access. Now, I know it works differently in different states, but any vote for me in my campaign doesn't do anything to get the Green Party in Minnesota a recognition, right? That's only for statewide things. And so even someone running, right, as a Green on anything that is a statewide race, right, such as for president, is helpful for Greens in their own state. Because at least for us, if we can get a 1% of people, right, to vote, especially in a safe state like Minnesota, we haven't voted, we've been blue since before I was born, since before the mom of my current manager was born. Getting that 1% and that recognition by the state is really important for later minor party status. So
Yep. Same thing in Maryland. We're 1%. We haven't voted for a Republican since like 1984 or maybe 1988. I think that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by like 33% and a million votes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we're nowhere close. And, so that 1% for us, it's ballot access so that we can run down ballot candidates. We can run state delegate candidates. We can run city council candidates. So, yeah. And, I think it's important for folks who are not in the Green Party to understand that we are a party. We are not just a presidential candidate. We are not just a website. We're a party. We work together and we try to get resource ideas and experience to each other. So I'm glad to hear that that is working for you. I want to turn to some of the issues that you're running on and that are important to you. And so what I'm going to do here is go through some of the issues, some of the issue areas that you identified as a priority. And I want to hear what you think some of the problems are and some of the solutions that you have for each one of them. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Let's start with housing.
Yeah, so that one's really big. So in all of the U.S., I think I believe the current metrics are that 60% of Americans are one paycheck away from homelessness, and definitely seeing it, feeling it here, not only with my own neighbors who are currently unhoused or unsheltered, but even my neighbors who are housed, who are like, I can't, like, if I just lost my job, I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next month, right? I have neighbors that really tragically, about over a month ago, my neighbor's apartment complex got burned down just one street across from me. And a lot of those folks are then being, supposedly taken care of by the Red Cross and then found new housing. And they have texted me just because I want to stay in touch with them. And I was out there till 3 a.m. doing interpretation. And they're like, we literally cannot pay, $2,500 a month. There is no way for their family of, I think, 5 or 6 for a 2-bedroom. And then even when I was reaching out myself to affordable housing nonprofits and such, a studio apartment that they had listed was for like $1,000. And I'm like, how is this this is the affordable housing, this right here? Not only that, but we currently don't have any laws that prevent landlords from denying people if they're on Section 8. So let's say, I'm pretty sure this hasn't changed. Last I checked was 2 years ago when I was working with a client, that the wait period for Section 8 was 8 years. They were currently homeless, so they're like, that's not going to work out. It was 8 years. And so let's say you get on Section 8, right? And you're like, all right, I got payment from the government. Now I'm going to go and, get an apartment somewhere. Because there's also a lot of apartments that are cheaper than this, but aren't labeled as public or affordable housing. And then those landlords are legally allowed to deny you if you're on Section 8. And so you've got the funding, you're going to find a place to live, and then you're denied because of where that funding comes from and what that means, I guess, as a person or a tenant, which is bizarre. And then not only that, but we're seeing a lot of youth go into homelessness or unshelteredness for various reasons, and also a lot of elders too, which is deeply unfortunate, especially as a lot of elders want to be housed together if they're a couple, and they're not allowed that by different payment or other stipulations. Also, there's been a lot of what we would call, and I think this is what it's called in other places, but sweeps of encampments. Mm-hmm. And so as a health professional, it is very important actually to have a consistent place where you think you'll find your client, right? Because not only is it very hard to find housing and services, but if you lose your client, right, because they don't have a phone or a stable place to live, it's like you have to start all over again. And so the sweeps, not only is it not helping anyone because you're just kind of moving people across, different parts of the city, and then also exacerbating their current trauma and addiction. But now the people who are trying to help them can no longer find them. Mm-hmm. And then we also spend, I don't know how much money on fencing and putting riffraff, that's what it's called, just like concrete debris over all this stuff that people prefer, right, to their unhoused neighbors. And so a lot of that, I feel that can be addressed at the state level. A lot of these are interjurisdictional, which is also the bane of my existence, of someone telling me at a certain level, well, that's not in our jurisdiction. That's their jurisdiction, right? And as far as I'm concerned as a health professional, if someone's homeless or loses their housing or becomes ill or dies due to being unsheltered, that happens on all of our watches. It is all of our jurisdictions.
And so because of that, the state has some ability to act on this in a way that the city or the town or whatever, the municipality doesn't. Is that what? the state has a unique authority to be able to act on housing?
Oh yeah. I guess one thing I talk about a lot. Sorry if I'm going down on a different tangent. It's
No,
definitely a
no, it's all
passion of
good.
mine. Um, we could lift the ban on rent control. The state has banned rent control, so if a municipality decides that it's a good course of action, uh, they can't do that, right? Which doesn't make any sense to me. I feel like as a state, we also give money through bonding, and so particularly in a recent situation, uh, affordable housings, particularly for people who are being discharged from a medical stay and were too ill to be going back to the street, their building has fallen into such disarray that no one can live there anymore. They reached out for bonding by the state, and none of that went through because of a big debacle that happened during the legislative process. And now they're basically like they almost had to close. They still closed for a certain period of time, but I feel like a lot of this could have been avoided, and also they wouldn't have had to have dipped into the state budget, or not the state, but the city budget, if that was actually able to go um, through the state. So
So
that
like
is
if it
one
was a
aspect.
priority for the state to take care of this, and there was somebody in the state legislature that was making it a red line priority, like, no, we got to
Hmm.
make sure people are housed. Um, you don't end up in that situation. You end up in a place
Hmm.
where um, they have the resources they need to keep that building open.
Yeah, and it especially grinds my gears because next, and not only is this housing agate housing in my neighborhood, but it's also really close to something called the US Bank Stadium. We hosted the Super Bowl there, I don't know how many years ago. And that does get funding, right? A supposedly profitable thing, can get funding to put up its fences and stuff, and yet we somehow weren't able to give funding to our affordable housing that we keep on saying is a priority and is like dwindling and we don't have enough of, right? So I would like
So,
that to be a priority.
yeah, so it seems like lift preemption on local rent control, um, like invest in affordable housing, and make sure the state is there for resilience housing when people need transition or something like that. All of those seem like totally reasonable policy options that
Yeah.
actually would solve the problem. Um, is there anything else on housing that you would like to see, that you would like to pursue if you were in the legislature?
Yeah, I am very interested in shared ownership, especially as a potential solution or contributor for community wealth building, as we definitely have a lot of issues with folks from either out of state or even sometimes out of the country scooping up a whole bunch of buildings and turning would-be homeowners into renters, um, and also in supporting tenant unions. So I would like to see some more push on creating those types of programs so that if we are going to, because density is here to stay. My district, it takes half of the downtown area, and there's no reason why, right, we can't collectively own our apartment complexes, right? So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love all of that, and again, if we ever talk similarities, I would love to point you to see if you are connected with a group called the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, which is
Mm,
trying to do similar
mhm,
things here in a particularly disinvested industrial part of town, and it is these solutions are not. These solutions are things that make sense in cities across the
mhm,
country. These solutions are things that make sense in states across the country. They're not new, they're not
mhm.
untested, and it is really about having the political will to make them priorities instead of having them just be things that we talk about, but instead be things that become policy. And that means
Yeah.
getting the people in office who are going to make them a priority. You know, so all right. Anything else on housing?
Um, I think that is the main points for now.
Okay.
Uh, but I could definitely go down go down many different routes.
Yeah, yeah. Not the style of this show, but I have a friend who does a podcast where he does a very deep dive with candidates on their area
Oh,
of
nice. Yeah.
expertise. And so he takes an hour and he would say, Toya, do you want to talk about housing? Do you want to talk about climate?
Hmm.
Which of these things? And then it is a really deep dive conversation on housing. And I love that format too. And maybe sometime we'll try that out and keep going down on that rabbit hole, because I think there's a lot to talk about there, and there's a lot of really meaningful solutions that are in the housing conversation that
Hmm.
never hear the light of day in most politics.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And even with my other priorities, this was something I struggled with at the beginning, is also pulling them apart into their different sections, because so much about health is also in housing. Like, I've been working on collaboratively working on a bill called the Clear Bill, which is so that your health insurance can cover things such as mold mitigation. We don't have any good resources in Minnesota or Minneapolis for that. I guess you're just screwed. When it's something that can be seen, clinically, and is just not taken care of there. And of course, with climate, you have and climate and health, right? You have all of the gas stoves, and you have like all of the different weatherization projects and how to make that more accessible. So,
Yeah, and well, let's talk about that a little bit. I know health is not on the list of questions that I had shared ahead of time, but I know it's a thing that you're ready to talk about. So, what are some of the problems with health for folks in Minnesota, and how would you address them?
yeah. So right now, I guess, we do have some of the more advanced healthcare in the US, from what I understand. And I believe that we have recently allowed for people to opt into our state program, because right now that's only for folks who are at a certain uh, income or lack thereof to be able to get into that. And right now we're looking at, and this is something that's been working a long time, before me even, right? So I don't want to say I came up with this, but of course, universal healthcare and a single payer healthcare. And so, having that all like in-house, and by in-house I mean, not being outsourced to different, private insurances, and also having this be available to everyone, because there are definitely times when the state insurance is a lot better for folks than what they can get available. And I've also heard that talked a lot even in greater Minnesota, where they
Mhm.
have like less opportunities for coverage. Speaking about greater Minnesota, while that isn't my district, I still feel like I'm right as a state representative,
Yeah.
also talking about all of the different like clinics and hospitals that have closed in rural and semi-rural Minnesota, as well as lack of access to services, such as like reproductive health or emergency services and the like. That would be something I would like to put some prioritizing in, or some type of like action planning, to see how we can better serve folks, so that we're not, one, bottlenecking everybody into the cities, but also allowing people to be able to get care where they live.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. So outside of those things, I did mention briefly before that, as well as our, issues that we're having here with homelessness, this is also deeply tied with substance abuse,
Hmm.
and especially like fentanyl, that we're seeing, affecting all age groups. It also affects housed people, and in every income bracket, right? But especially my unhoused relatives. And
Hmm.
so, with that, I really want to be focusing on and investing in community based and culturally relevant care, as a lot of my Indigenous neighbors have mentioned that there's a lot of cultural and community building that needs to happen for a person, not just, weaning them off of drugs or addiction, but also getting them back into community and getting them back into loving themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm also seeing a lot of youth, especially Somali youth, and even like Somali teen girls, also, suffering from substance abuse. And how can we support the Somali community as well in their ways of dealing with, which is essentially a chronic illness?
Hmm.
So that would be something that I would like to support, fund, um, make that happen essentially. So
Yeah, there's a group here that I did a podcast last year with my friend Lawrence Grand Prix, and he works with a group called Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. And he did
mhm,
a whole study on community-based responses to addiction treatment. Uh,
yeah.
and what he sort of says is that there are sort of two main pathways that people are funneled toward. It's either very medical or
Mhm,
very like 12 steps.
mhm,
And he's like, Black communities, Indigenous communities, Afrocentric communities often have different approaches to these things that don't get the emphasis, they don't get the funding, and they get washed away and sort of evidence-based approaches that get funding
mhm,
from the same nonprofit industrial and the same academic complex. And so he did a whole study on how this happens and how we need to have these culturally relevant and culturally developed indigenous treatment programs. And I'll share the link for you.
yeah.
Check it out after the election. But it's interesting stuff, and I think there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people in cities who are starting to explore how we get these things, the resources they
Mhm,
need, instead of just doing what we've been doing, which isn't really working.
mhm.
So
No,
yeah.
yeah, I would love to read that. Um, yeah, just because I definitely want to support that, as a representative, as a neighbor, as whatever position it is that I might find myself in,
Yeah.
because that is how we're gonna get, to health.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, I will share that with you. Let's talk about public and community safety.
yeah, so this keeps on popping into this phrase keeps on popping into my head, so I'll go ahead and say it. But definitely Minneapolis has been put on blast, right, for how racist our police have been, specifically the MPD. And that's also, right, exacerbated by the many other ways that systemic racism exists here in Minnesota. So, um, like I've mentioned with substance abuse, when it comes to interpersonal violence and harm, I do very much believe in transformational justice and in restorative justice, and how that can work in communities, and how we can have, right, this community-based approach to safety. Um, I know that within my own neighborhood, right, there has been some funding, right, available for um, right, for public safety or whatever. And instead of giving it to the community organization that had already been, or community organizations that had already been in coalition working on creating relationships with neighbors and actually creating that safety through relationship, they're like, well, we rather just, have an outside vendor, security team to do it for us, which I don't think that's really going to solve the issue there. And while I find this to be an obvious connection, I think some folks do sometimes miss it. But a lot of crime comes out of poverty. I was speaking with a social worker the other day, and they told me that one of their students, who has like issues with truancy and whatnot, had stolen a vehicle so that they could get to work. And I'm like, not only are we losing, such like an intelligent individual, right? But also we are ignoring all of the systemic reasons why they would even choose, right, to uh, commit a crime to begin with, right? Where that just seems like the most obvious answer to someone. So yeah, I am very supportive of a universal basic income. We did a pilot, or not we, but our sister city, St. Paul, did a pilot on universal basic income, and they found that to be really successful. And I also think that doing things such as universal health care and, you know, how we are approving different services such as food stamps and such as rent assistance and utility assistance, all of that decreases the pressure, allows families to be able to be together more often, create that social safety and also material safety, right? If you're not worried if you're going to be able to feed yourself or your kid, um, but also helps people's stress levels decrease and actually start to get to the root of a lot of this trauma that we've all felt as a community and even historically over generations. And I do believe that that's how we're going to get to a safer community, is us keeping each other safe
Yeah.
and investing in that.
Investing in the stuff that address the material conditions and investing in the things that people in communities have developed in order to keep themselves
Mm-hmm.
safe, instead of investing in these sort of academically created ideas that are
Mm-hmm.
from the outside and like have a good, sometimes these in Baltimore sometimes these things will come in that have this great pedigree of a bunch of academics who have supported it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're wrong or it's bad, but if it's displacing stuff that folks in Black communities have done for a long time in order to keep each other safe, or it's not resourcing those things, when with a little bit more resources those things could have a lot wider reach, it is harm. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there is a one of the things I think about this a lot of times is, if you think about the sort of way that the Democrats approach community violence, it's about guns. It's about police training, which leads to
Mm-hmm.
cop cities and things like that. It's
Yeah.
about gun crime, with a heavy emphasis on gun crime, like this sort of false dichotomy between violent and nonviolent crime. And it's about these sort of academic programs that come into communities and try to tell them how to do community violence interruption, instead of
Mm-hmm.
looking at what's working in those communities already and figuring out how to give them the resources. And I think the green approach to this, and I love hearing you talk about this, is investing in those indigenous and community networks,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to address the material needs, and not trying to come in with some new sort of shiny best practice,
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes those things are good, but when they displace what's already working, or when they come into a community and tell them what they need to do instead of investing in what they are doing, I think that's a real difference between how Greens approach this and how Democrats
Mm-hmm.
approach this a lot of times. And I'm excited to hear you talking about it as part of the campaign. So
Yeah. And I also appreciate your distinction or emphasis, right, on the differences of what I would say is academic or Western, right? Academic
yeah,
thought. Though I'm sure that there are a lot of resources of people doing studies outside of that. It's just that they don't get the time of day. Um, and I take a lot of inspiration from my own roots. And so there's a lot of community accountability work that has been done in, for instance, Colombia, where there's been, so much trauma and violence and crime and stuff. And how can we heal as a community, especially since a lot of what I'm seeing in some of my more democratically minded neighbors is still kind of well, if we just get those people out, then the problem will be solved.
right.
Which
And
is just a stone's throw away from racism, but that's a difference. That's a whole nother can of worms.
yeah. And I mean, and I think some of this too is there's this distinction that people will make between like violent crime and nonviolent crime.
Mhm.
Well, my experience and some folks that I work with, again, folks from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, sort of say that line is actually blurry because a lot of times in a high crime over police neighborhood, somebody will carry a gun or a knife for safety because the police are
Mhm.
not offering them safety. And then if they get picked up for smoking weed on the street or something,
Mhm.
that becomes a violent crime at that point because they had that gun or knife on them. And even that distinction, um, oftentimes, I think, gets us back in an attempt to sort of make it like there are good criminals
Mhm.
and bad criminals. I actually think it widens the net of people for whom um, the criminal justice system is the step of first resort instead of the step of last resort, you know,
No, yeah, definitely.
and
And like,
it's like communities have figured out ways to do accountability and rehabilitation, and we need to invest in those things
mhm.
instead of trying to bring everybody into the criminal justice system.
Mhm. And I think also another thing that, um, right, I'm just gonna use the word Democrats, I'm sure other people too, um, I think get wrong, right, is that this is not we're not doing this out of naivete, right? We're not doing this because we think everything will be great and no one will commit crime ever again, you know, or that it's not painful, right? A lot of this comes out of deep hope and love. I remember I was talking with someone in North Minneapolis, and they were telling me how their son, who was I believe, like a grade schooler, was killed in a drive-by shooting, and that obviously deep tragedy, and how later nowadays they actually work in talking with youth who have been jailed or who were jailed as youth, right, for violent crime, and are able, like, how does that community healing work, and also coming at that with that deep love and grief, right, and be like, I can't, or I'm trying to channel what I remember her telling me, but being like, I can't just be angry, right, and be blaming all of these other people for all these crimes they've committed. We're not going to heal as a community this way. um and I was just so inspired by what the work she's been able to do, and that also shows to me that it's possible.
Yeah, and it's happening. It's not just
Yeah.
it is happening today.
Mhm.
Um, and that people in communities who have been left behind by whatever party, whatever system, are figuring out how to heal, how to make things better, how to bring accountability, how to bring rehabilitation
Mhm.
without dragging more people into the criminal justice system, which we know what the implications are. We know what the implications of
Mhm.
dragging young Black and Indigenous and Latine people into the criminal justice system are, and we keep doing it, even though we know. I mean, it's almost like the naive thing is to keep doing that and thinking that
Mhm.
that is somehow eventually going to solve the problem
Yeah.
when we know it isn't. We know full well it
Mhm.
isn't. And look, and at the same time, I appreciate people who are in communities that are over policed and are violent and they
Mhm.
feel unsafe in their communities. Like, it's a hard conversation to have. I think I don't think there's
Mhm.
an easy it, it's I think there's a risk of simplifying this hard conversation. But when I think one of the great things about running for office is you get out there, you knock on doors, and you have these hard conversations with people, and you realize that they can hold two truths at the same time. They can be mad at the
Mhm.
way the criminal justice system works, and they can wish that their neighborhood was safer and that kids in their neighborhood weren't being killed while the police are arresting other kids in their neighborhood. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot to this conversation, and I think the way that you're approaching it is a really good way to address it. And I'm heartened to hear that those are conversations that you're having, because this is one of the hardest conversations I think cities can have. Is how do we deal with this, right? Like, nobody
Mhm.
wants to
Yeah.
see our young people killed. Nobody wants to see our elders robbed. Nobody wants to see any of that. And we know that the solutions that have been put on offer to us by Democrats, Republicans, the academy, the nonprofit industrial complex, oftentimes do nothing for people in those communities.
No, yeah, definitely. Like I'm like very happy to be able to be having this conversation, just because I do think that it is something that's very important to talk about and also relate to in a human way, right?
Yeah.
Because if we keep things sanitized and by numbers or statistics, I think that's where some people end up going a little bit awry there. I know in my own district, we've had, several fatalities due to crime, or what is thought of to be a crime, with my neighbor's apartment complex. That People are still investigating that for arson because of this situation, but two people did die in that apartment as they were unable to escape. And then we did have a young teenage girl, and then several young teenage girl who did pass away because she was run over by a car in a hit and run, and it was very much purposeful vehicle assault. And then several other teens, both either physically or mentally traumatized from that. And then a shooting nearby the same area a week later, again, mostly youth. And that's like, I I don't know. I hate seeing that be an excuse, right? To turn to, now we need more police, right?
Right.
Especially since, well, not to get too into the weeds, but the police were actually already there, and this still happened. So I don't know, but a lot of that healing is in community and doesn't start and end by, well, see, I told you so. So
Yep.
that you
Yep.
can
Yep.
see in some spaces.
Well, I am glad that we spent some time on this, and um, we're getting toward an hour.
Mhm.
We are Greens, so I want to hear about climate and the environment, and hear about
Yeah.
what your thoughts are on that. And we'll pick up. Folks can follow you for some of the economic justice, some of the education, some of the
Yeah.
democracy stuff. But I do want to hear problems and solutions you have on climate
Mhm.
and environment.
Yeah, so definitely right now we are dealing with, in my own neighborhood, especially, and in our district, with air pollution. So trying to shut down the incinerator there. Folks can also learn more about that at Shut Down the HERC, HERC, for the Zero Burn Coalition. And also in changing the highways, as we have Interstate 94 and 35 that goes through Minneapolis, and having that also be community driven, and perhaps changing that to either be rerouted or turned into a boulevard. And so those are exciting ways that we are trying to combat, right, air pollution. I'm also interested in what I can do, whether it's reform or something our state pollution control agency, especially in the ways that they've allowed either different industries to go without having to renew their permits, or just completely violate their permits, such as with Line 3 in the Smith Foundry. The Smith Foundry, actually, the EPA came in and had to shut that down themselves. And that was, I feel like that should be a huge embarrassment for the state, that they approved it twice and it still got shut down because they weren't in, since this foundry wasn't in compliance, and it was very obvious. Um, and so I would be very interested in what we can do if we're going to set these policies, if we're going to set what we have called environmental justice zones or green zones. If we say we're going to put this in place, how are we making sure that we're actually keeping true to our word? I'm also very interested in the watersheds and water. We're the land of like a whole bunch of lakes, 10,000 lakes, I think. And so taking care of that water source is very important. And I'm also very interested in what we can do regarding what is scope 3 emissions and the security of our supply chains, especially as a health professional, seeing the devastation in the supply chain from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, taking out all of the medical industry manufacturing there, and then now everyone in the States doesn't have sailing bags, or one boat gets stuck in the canal sideways, and now everybody's having issues with supply chain with things that should be we should be able to locally source. Also, I'm very much into solar. I want solar to be owned cooperatively, and also be decentralized, as well as having that wind and solar more in our state, because we actually import all of our energy. We import all of our coal. We import all of our natural gas. And so having more of that Minnesota-made energy would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we have trash as part of our trash incineration as part of our renewable portfolio here in Maryland. And it's so ridiculous. It is an incinerator that sits in the south part of Baltimore. And the air quality, the asthma levels, the health levels around it are routinely terrible. And it is burning all sorts of things in that incinerator, and we call it renewable energy, and they get tax credits, for burning trash. And part of the reason that is the case is because I think for us, our renewable portfolio, this sort of market-driven approach to it, wouldn't work without trash incineration. It is. I did a podcast last season with a woman named Dr. Nikki Fabricamp, and she wrote a book called Fighting to Breathe about youth struggles against the incinerator and against in the same neighborhood or in the same area, there is a CSX coal export pile that is an open air coal pile that gets trucked in from West Virginia, from Ohio, sits open air in this neighborhood, and then gets exported around the world. And it is like these air quality things, these incineration things are so solvable. It is literally denying them the permit to keep doing that. The state has the power to do that, and they refuse to in our case because those companies make big donations to politicians, and every time one of these bills comes up, they put the thumb on the scale at the last minute. And it seems like these things are so interconnected. Our blue states and our blue cities still have these problems. And there's people dying of respiratory illnesses, of all of these things. And the solution is, as you say, like, we need to invest in solar. We need to invest in wind. We need to invest in geothermal. We know the answer to these problems. It's not that nobody has come up with them. It's not that nobody suggests them. It's that the people who are in office don't have the political will or the political power to do it, and it's sometimes that part is both creates despair and hope for me, because it is like, I look at it and I'm like, how are you folks that are otherwise reasonably good folks willing to compromise this community that has the coal dust, or this community that has the incinerator, and not to take the step to invest in these green energies and these decentralized ways of doing it. And I love to hear that you're taking this on in a place that is pretty progressive, is pretty liberal, and but still has these issues that need to be dealt with, because people are dying. People are dying, and the planet is dying.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think that's one reason, and I think going all the way back to the beginning, why I decided to run green is because, supposedly, right, the blue side won. We did it, right? There's a lot of places there's no Republican running, and yet we're still unable, right, to be like, hey, just stop, like, polluting the lungs of, like, young Black kids.
Right.
Just stop,
Right.
And I laugh because it hurts. So
yeah, it does. It hurts to understand that the people in power know the problem, they know the solution, and they don't do it. They don't do it, and so I'm excited to see you put that pressure on them. I'm excited to see you get your neighbors behind putting that pressure on them, because this is going to be what determines the life of folks for the next, this will determine
Yeah.
people's lives. It will determine the planet's life. And, we need somebody out there, especially in these uncontested seats, making this an issue and pushing on it. So
Mhm.
thank you for highlighting it. Thank you for doing the work on
Yeah.
it. And you know, I'd love to talk more about some of this, and
Mhm.
I'll send you a link to that book by Dr. Fabricant. I think you'll find a real connection with it. I want to zoom out a little bit as we close out here, and you talk about how justice goes beyond electoral politics
Mhm.
and issue mobilization. And I think we've touched on this quite a bit as we started to talk through it. But sort of what organizing goals do you hope to advance with your campaign, regardless of whether you win or lose?
Yeah, so regardless of whether I win or lose, I want to do what, or at least what I call capacity building. So, what I mean by that is so that I want to give my neighbors like not only the space and the material resources to start to engage in democracy and engage in thinking about what their future could be, right? In a way that is, exciting to them, healing for them, grieving for them, and also inspire people, who may have already counted themselves out. I've talked with a lot of my neighbors who they're like, I was told explicitly that my vote doesn't matter because I'm indigenous or because I'm black or because I'm like an immigrant. And in some ways, the way that the political system and elections have worked, it has proved that for them. And I want to give, or at least help spark that hope, right, in their own capacity as a leaders, right? Because the leadership, I hope people look inward, right? If they can see me doing it and they're like, you know what, I could do something like that. I also don't have the quintessential political credentials. I'm also, someone who is neurodivergent or I'm disabled or I'm a survivor of violence or whatnot. And all these reasons why I shouldn't be, a public figure or doing this and rewrite that narrative. And I want to inspire my neighbors to to recognize that leadership in themselves. And in the future, I want to see people taking that leadership roles in whatever area it is, um, to be able to make that future, co-create our future together. So
I love that. I think that's really a perfect reason for running a campaign like the one that you're running. And from seeing the community endorsements on your page and seeing your social media, it seems like that is working. At least from where I sit, I'm seeing you do that,
yeah,
and I'm excited to see what
thank you.
happens
Yeah.
over the next, 25 days or so. Toya, how do folks get in touch with you? How do they follow your campaign? How do they donate if they want to?
Yeah, so if you visit my website, which is votetoyalopez.com, there should be a little donate button there that connects you to my crowd pack. And if you're in Minnesota, up to $75 is can be reimbursed by the state with political contributions refund. Otherwise, you can send me an email at votetoyalopez@gmail.com, or you can even, send me a text message at 612-293-9275, or just take a look at that on my website as well. And I can speak in Spanish. And so if that is some way that people would like to connect, I can do that as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Toya. I appreciate that. We'll put the links for all of your stuff in the show description. Before we go, is there anything you want to leave folks with? Anything you want to say that we haven't covered? Anything you want to
Yeah.
close with?
I guess as we've talked a lot of what I would call doom and gloom here, I also want to make sure we know that we have, and not just we as in me as an individual, but as a community and as a planet, a great capacity to heal. That, in just 10 years, we can start to heal from like those cardiovascular issues, like start to heal our tree, our tree space, or also our native grasses or whatever biosystem you have. And we can also be healing our air and water too. So there's a lot to gain from starting to do what's right.
Excellent. Toya, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're busy as you get
Likewise,
to the
yeah.
end of the campaign, but I really appreciated this conversation with you. And I hope it is the first of many we have as we are pursuing this big structural change that gets our neighbors and builds this power from below to build this future that we know we want and we know that our communities deserve. So Toya, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
And thank you.
All right. Well, this was a wonderful show. I was really excited to get a chance to do it. I've really enjoyed having this season be focused on talking to green candidates and talking to folks who are doing the work across the country, up and down the ballot. And we have another show coming up this week with Claudia Barber, who is running for judge here and who is running for a nonpartisan judicial position here in Maryland and Anne Arundel County. So we will have that coming on very soon. And I want to say thank you to Dana Polson, who is my wife, but also the producer and the one that makes everything happen with this show. And so thank you to Dana, thank you to Toya, and thank you to you all for tuning in tonight. And with that, I will see you very soon.